Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with AvaTax. I'm your host, Ted Spence. I'm the director of the AvaTax API team. And I have with me here Jeff Meisner on the developer marketing crew. Hey, Jeff.
Morning, how you doing?
Hey, so for today's Office Hours, I wanted to chat a little bit about customizing transactions. This is an area that I think everyone needs to know a little bit about because AvaTax has a lot of options for making sure that the transactions that you store are kept in a way that's useful to you. On the other hand, though, this is very flexible. Like there's a million options here. So a lot of people come to me and just say, hey, how do you do this? Like, what should I do? Well, and part of my big problem is I'm not very good at saying, what should you do? I'm the technical guy. I just say, how do you do it, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of tricky because, like, you know, there's a million options out there. How do you decide which one is right for you? For this context, the best thing that I can do is I can give you examples of what people do and how they work with AvaTax. So let's go ahead and look over here. This is the AvaTax Developer Guide. We wrote a book with just documentation about everything that you can do with AvaTax. And this documentation contains a whole lot of, bits of information that people have told us. I've gotten feedback from tech support and so forth. Every question you guys ask us is wrapped up in this developer guide at some point or another. And it's probably worth mentioning here, this office hours session is intended to be interactive. Jeff here is going to help facilitate questions. So at any point while I'm talking about this topic, please feel free to speak up, and Jeff here will make sure that your questions get answered.
Definitely, get the questions going.
Cool, so let me just begin by saying, like, customizing your transactions, really means different things to everyone. What we can do is we can talk about how you can use a whole bunch of the data fields that exist within AvaTax to make the transaction more appropriate for you. And part of what we do is we give you the ability to use multiple different types of addresses. Probably the key thing that everyone learns is that there's a huge difference between a retail point-of-sale transaction and one that's shipped. And this is actually a key conversation item just because of the recent Supreme Court ruling, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Speaking of which, Jeff, just since we've mentioned that topic, could you look up through the marketing calendar and see when the next webinar is talking about the Supreme Court ruling?
Yeah,
I know they've been doing this recently.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people who are really asking about how that affects their business. Avalara's policy is we are here to support you and make compliance easy. We don't take a position on the law, but we do give you a whole bunch of tools to make the right decision for your business. So we'll go ahead and we'll follow up with you shortly with some information about other topics. But in the meantime, the key thing we're going to talk about first is that there's a difference between a single location transaction and one that involves shipping addresses. So let's go ahead and go to the API reference material here. We're going to see that the Create Transaction API is right here. This is the way that we calculate transactions here in AvaTax. So let's go ahead and experiment with this right now. I'm going to fill it with sample data. This sample data includes a single location transaction. That single location transaction essentially means I'm at a cash register. I walk up to a cash register, I give someone cash or a credit card, and they give me a good. They give me something. So let's say for this hypothetical scenario, I'm purchasing something in California. Boom, there you go. I've got a transaction. Transaction is directly related to a single address in California. Now let's say I ship it. Let's say I ship it from California, and I ship to, let's say I ship it to Avalara's office. 255 South King Street, is that right? I haven't memorized your new office address yet.
It's 255 South King Street.
All right, cool, awesome.
Yeah, so just getting back to the Wayfair. So we've got some webinars coming up, one today, actually. one tomorrow, the 27th, one the 28th, and one on July 12th. And this will have our resident Wayfair expert, Scott Peterson, on there. So he's a great resource for everything you need to know, whether you're a developer or a marketer or a CFO. He'll be able to answer your questions.
Awesome. Yeah, I work with Scott Peterson a lot. He's fantastic, and I definitely think that if you're interested in that topic, then that's really a great place to go to learn more about it.
Yeah, and I think we should definitely do a developer-specific webinar too on the.
Well, that would certainly be interesting. What I can tell you is that the API itself takes no position on any of these legal issues. The key thing that you'll want to recognize is that a ruling like this affects Nexus. And let me give you an example of what Nexus means in the real world. I'm using the AvaTax developer website. The AvaTax developer website includes a basic account that does not declare Nexus in a variety of states. So what you can see here on this screen is that this transaction that I simulated right here is being done on a location that is exempt. So it's exempt because I do not have Nexus.
Right.
The core of the Wayfair decision is about how people are required to declare Nexus. So without trying to prejudice you, what we're seeing right here is that your shipping address and your destination address affect, those two combined with your Nexus declarations affect your tax. So this is the first key thing to think about AvaTax. Let me show you something else that's worth knowing. I'm going to log in as one of my test accounts. This test account, I don't need to remember that password. This test account, I can go into the settings and I can manage where you collect and remit tax. This is the user-friendly way to describe the concept known as Nexus. Nexus is, of course, a legal term of art, but this is the common usage term. This is where I collect tax. So what you can see here is that I have now declared in this test account, I've declared that I am going to collect tax in all of these different jurisdictions. I've declared that I'm going to collect tax in these Canadian jurisdictions. Hey, you know what? AvaTax is giving me warnings. I need taxpayer ID numbers. You know, these are all important things to look at.
Yep.
So the developer account that we're looking at has different declarations of Nexus. And part of the reason that AvaTax is done this way is because we want to separate the programmers from the tax specialists. Your company's tax specialist is working to figure out where you appropriately have tax, where you appropriately need to declare Nexus, collect tax. On the other hand, your programmers really don't care. They just want to write the code correctly.
Right.
So am I seeing the flag? Do we have a question on the line?
Let's see. Yes, okay. So my company sends really large invoices, generally more than 100 line items. How do I tell AvaTax which warehouse each line item shipped from?
Oh, okay. So this is actually a critical part of customization. Here in this demo that I just showed you, we showed you how to send a single line item from California to Washington. Well, unfortunately, the key thing to note here is that I've got these line items and the addresses are down here. These addresses relate to the entire transaction, whereas each line is just going to obey those same addresses. Well, I put together a demo. Actually, I think I can dig up, I had this mock-up right here. It is possible to move the addresses out of the transaction into the individual lines. Once you do that, though, you actually have to declare the addresses at each line. So this can make your API call a little bit big, but what you can do is you can say each line has individual ship from and ship to addresses. And you can just repeat this as many times as you want. You could have as many line items as you need. So each line item can be a different amount, can be a different tax code, and it can have different shipping addresses. The thing to keep in mind here is that the instant that you declare addresses at the line item, those addresses override anything that is within the document. So there is no mixing. You can't mix some addresses defined at the document level and some addresses defined at the line level. We just, when we were testing this, we actually encountered a lot of scenarios where people just had a hard time keeping track of this. So we just want to make it explicit. Once you put your address at the line level, that line will only take its addresses from the line level.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's actually simulate this right now. I'm going to take a copy of this transaction, and let's go ahead and submit this right now. And what you'll see is that there's actually now multiple addresses involved in this transaction. In this particular case, there's 3 different addresses because there were 2 lines, each of which had a different ship from address, but they both had the same destination address. So AvaTax automatically deduped all of those addresses for you, and it made sure that even if you include the same address a bunch of times, it will dedupe it and return the correct number of addresses. So that helps a little bit there. But that's the general answer to your question. I hope that gives you the information you were looking for. Let's talk a little bit more about addresses. So the developer guide right here explains that document level addresses affect all lines in the document. But it also mentions that when you use line level addresses, just like I talked about, you can give it its own addresses object. So what you'll see right here is in this test case describes how you set addresses at the document level, but then you set an override for line 1. And what you'll find out is that line 2 is going to inherit its addresses from the document, but line 1 is going to be different. It's also worth mentioning that there are some very strict legal definitions for an interesting topic called point of order. This is a pretty technical tax-specific thing. So if anyone wants to ask questions about point of order, I'd be happy to answer them. But in general, you don't need to worry about this. Point of order only takes effect when you have a call center that is within a jurisdiction that has complex laws about call center behavior. So in general, you can avoid these. You mostly have to worry about ship from and ship to. Only a small number of people are going to be affected by point of order. And our partner launch team is really good at helping that. Let's talk about another type of information. This is a different way of customizing your transactions. You can customize your transactions by adding a little bit of metadata to each one of them. Well, I'm going to give you an example. Just because you and I have been talking about this, you and I both collect comic books, right?
Definitely.
So let's go in and let's look up the tax code for comic books. Aha, there we go, PB 100. So you've been collecting comic books recently. What was the comic book you purchased that you're really excited about? It was
I just got a Black Panther #1.
Black Panther #1. Holy crumbs! And that was actually a
Kirby book.
Oh boy, wow. Classic history right there. So let's go ahead and let's record this transaction. We're going to go ahead and put in a sample right here. This is a tax code for a comic book. I'm going to put in a description. What is Black Panther? All right. What did you pay for it?
It was about $45.
$45. Great. Now, we're going to add a little bit of metadata. So who was the author of this comic book?
Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
So these fields, ref1 and ref2, are a little bit of extra metadata about this transaction. You can keep track of this extra information in these free-form fields. So it could be that if you were using AvaTax to manage your comic book collection, that is probably the most terrible example that I've just come up with.
You're literally taking all the joy out of collecting comic books.
I cannot imagine how you would use a tax accounting system to keep track of your comic book collection. But let's say that you decided to keep track of the writer and artist for all of your comic books. You could put that into the Ref 1 and Ref 2 field. I'm just terribly embarrassed. I can't believe I came up with that. But in the real world, there are people who use accounting systems, and so what they'll do is they'll put their accounting system's internal reference number in Ref 1, and they'll put their order management system reference in Ref 2. So like, let's say you have a big enterprise resource planning system. You could put in ERP number, that's my ERP order number here. And you could use that to keep track of your transaction. You could then also put in your shipping code or your waybill, wayball. You can keep track of information like this. These fields are there for you to just track extra metadata, and there's a couple of those fields. So we describe them right here on this customizing transaction. What you'll find is that there's document level reference fields, and then there's line level reference fields. So what would happen if you purchased an extra comic book? Like, I remember hearing you talk about purchasing, was it Dr. Strange?
Dr. Strange #1, yeah.
Okay, so let's add another line item for Dr. Strange. So at this point, you could say, hey, maybe you paid $55 for Dr. Strange #1.
Sounds about right.
Really? It just seems low. These are classic comics, man.
Well, they're all based on scarcity, right? It just means that they did a big print run.
Okay. So let's say I'm going to say I chose to keep this in one of your rooms. Let's add reference code. Where do you keep your comic books?
In my office, my home office, where my 5-year-old can't get to them.
So you could specify that this document went into your home office storage unit. Well, all right, there you go. Cool. Duplicate line items. Oh, I made a mistake. I put this as line item number 1. It should be line item 2. Okay, great. All right. So now we've got a transaction, and what you'll see right here is that it's stored as reference code home office. So this kind of information can help you keep track of things, and we designed this specifically to give Avalara customers the ability to put linkages between their transactions and AvaTax.
Right.
And I mean, sure, comic books is a pretty silly example, but I just seem to be liking classic comics nowadays. I think there's a kind of a weird innocence and forward-looking futurism that they had in the 60s.
Yeah, totally.
Kind of hard to get nowadays.
You sound very wistful, Ted.
Why, yes, I am. All right, so looking at this, there's a whole bunch of extra fields. Let's go through the rest of them. Reference field, we usually encourage people, reference code. We usually encourage people to use the same order number that's in your accounting system. Purchase order number, same PO number that you submitted when you placed the order, or the customer's PO number if they submitted the order to you. Salesperson code. We have some customers that use the salesperson code to group their transactions and see whether certain salespeople are properly handling sales tax.
Gotcha.
Description. Description is just free-form text. POS lane code. This is a little bit more interesting. This field, I actually remember when it was added, and didn't make sense to me at the time, but I've since talked to a lot of people. Apparently there is often a need to keep track of individual bugs by cash register.
Yeah, I bet.
If you've got 20 cash registers in a store and one cash register is screwing up its transactions, well, you might need to go into it and see whether it's got, the correct settings. So this POS lane code just helps you keep track of individual cash register lanes. Email address, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. Just so you know, nothing in AvaTax will actually use that email address. It's just a reference point of information for you to keep track of things. Now, on the other hand, then you've got line level reference fields. One thing that's worth mentioning about line level reference fields is that there is one and only one case where the description field actually has a defined legal meaning. You know, I originally wrote the documentation saying this was open-ended text, but I was corrected, shortly after it was published by people on our streamlined sales tax team. Apparently, this description field at the line level is actually used in the audit scenario. So in the streamlined sales tax governing board, they will actually do audits of pretty much everyone once a year. And they've designed their system to make it really quick and painless to do audits. It's actually just something that Avalara has to do on your behalf. And what they will do is they will actually check your field descriptions and make sure that they match the tax codes that you're using. So basically the rules are, if you are a streamlined sales tax participant, then you need to actually have an accurate description of the product. Otherwise, anything goes.
What's streamlined sales tax, Ted?
Oh boy, streamlined sales tax. Let's show. There is an organization called the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board. They manage an optional tax system that handles 24 different states. And if you opt in to streamlined sales tax, the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board will help you to file taxes in these 24 states.
Gotcha.
So what it will do is it will make you it will reduce the burden of filing tax in these states. However, it requires that you voluntarily comply and file tax in those states.
Gotcha.
There's a lot of details underneath the hood. If you're interested, please call Avalara, talk to one of our salespeople. We'd be happy to chat with you about it. Other than that, there's 3 additional fields that are available for you to use when putting information in about your transaction. You can store information about the revenue account number. This is basically a way to help track like who paid for it or what budget it comes out of. So like if you were using the expense reporting system that we use, you could basically track, oh, this should come out of the AvaTax budget or the marketing budget or something like that. Ref 1 and Ref 2 are just like what I showed you earlier. They're open for anything. So these fields, you can provide extra information. And here's an example that shows you various things that you can do and various ways that you can make them useful to you.
Ted, do we have time for a question?
Oh, certainly, go right ahead.
Let's see. Okay, how do I link transactions in AvaTax to my accounting system?
Well, I hope we just managed to cover a bit of that.
Okay.
The best advice that I can give you is spend a little bit of time looking at your accounting system and go back to these reference fields and figure out a mapping. And no matter what you do, publish that documentation internally within your company. Say, within AvaTax, we always use reference code to be the warehouse pack and ship number.
Right.
Or we always use the line level ref 1 field to indicate the SKU, something like that. Whatever your standards are, publish them and disseminate that information internally so that people can all agree. Because the only thing that's worse than having a standard that nobody uses is having a standard that people use inconsistently.
Right, right. All right, one other question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I have NetSuite integrated with AvaTax already. If I add AvaTax to my website shopping cart, will all the orders get double counted?
Okay, let me try to unpack that question really quick. So you've already gotten integration, right? That's what the question said?
Yep.
Okay.
With NetSuite.
So you've got an integration, and your integration is creating transactions. And what you're saying is you want to add another integration, which is what product?
Say if I add AvaTax to my website shopping cart, will all the orders get double counted? Well,
let's assume for the moment that you're talking about writing your own code, because I didn't hear the name of a product there. So if you're writing your own code, you do have the option of making sure that transactions will not be double counted. So here's how you would do it. Let's go ahead and reset this example. What we're going to do is we're going to put in a transaction code. This transaction code is going to be 2018-06-01. We're going to submit it. All right, so now we've got a transaction right there. That transaction has this specific transaction code. So what you would want to do is check to see what code NetSuite uses for creating transactions, and then make sure that the same code was processed by your website system. And what you would do is you would make sure that your website, I'm just going to hypothesize, please correct me if I'm wrong, just send a message to Jeff if anything is wrong here. I'm going to hypothesize that your orders come in through your website and then they get verified, validated, and signed off on by your accounting system. So if that was the case, your website would set the transactions to commit is false. So let's go ahead and create a new transaction. Commit is false. This would create a saved transaction. All right? So then your ERP system would then create the same transaction, but it would set it with commit to true. And it would update the transaction to committed.
Gotcha.
As long as both systems use the same code, you won't have a problem. So I think that's roughly the answer there. You just want to make sure that both systems use the same code. And you could also verify that by ensuring that your website uses a reference code and that your accounting system picks up that same code and verifies it.
Cool.
So really, that's a big challenge, which is just general integrations between multiple systems. You may also want to consider what your overall workflow is for AvaTax. Let me go back to the developer guide. Let's talk a little bit about reconciliation. I think somewhere in here I've got the actual workflow diagram. Let me find which page it's on. There's a really awesome picture here that I published on one of these pages, and I can't find it right now.
What are you looking for, Ted?
Ah, there we go. This is it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So this image right here shows you roughly how AvaTax works. When you create the transaction, your website should move it to the saved status. You can then commit it and move it to the committed status. So your website would do this first part, and then your ERP system or your accounting system would do this second part. And some people even go further, and they actually have 3 stages. They have their website create the transaction and save it. They have their accounting system verify the transaction and post it. And then they have their warehouse do the 3rd step, which is commit and ship it. So those 3 steps can all kind of interact with each other, and that's really what you want to look for in an integration.
Oh, that's a great illustration.
Yeah, so really, like, when you're customizing your AvaTax integration, really just talk to the different people that you work with. Talk to the people who build your website. Talk to the people who build your accounting system. And we try our best to make sure that this process is flexible enough to match the way your business works. We have some people that just skip everything and just go directly to committed. There's a lot of marketplace vendors out there on websites for whom every transaction is final. That's just the normal way of doing it. I do also want to mention one last thing, which is if you go through this multi-stage process and commit a transaction, if somebody comes back at the last minute and they ask for a refund, we have a specific API called refund transaction. And this refund API allows you to go back and tell us what the transaction was, and we will ensure that the transaction gives the correct refund amount.
Great.
So if your accounting system is a rigorous accounting system, which ensures that every transaction is permanently recorded in your ledger, what that means is that transactions can never be voided or adjusted. The only thing you can do is you can create an opposite ledger entry that zeroes out the transaction. It nets it out to 0.
Yep.
Refund transaction is how you net a transaction out to 0. I'm just getting the flag. I think we've just run out of time. I hope that this means that you're never going to have to refund that Dr. Strange #1, because
He'll have to pry it from my cold, dead hands.
I'm actually hoping to do that, really.
I'm not sure how to take that, Ted.
Well, maybe one of these days I'll ask you if I can read it, but you're probably just collecting it for value, aren't you?
I read it. You read it? Okay. Well, cool.
All right, well, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you for hanging out with us, spending 30 minutes of your day with us this morning. We hope you found some useful tools in AvaTax. And as always, please reach out on the developer community forums. If you go right here to help forums, you can ask a question. One of my team members will make sure to get you an answer within about 2 business days. We look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you have a ton of fun. Thanks very much. Take care. See you next time.
Take care.